Dear Karen, here I am, eccomi qua, tornata a Venezia un'altra volta ancora, returned to Venice yet again. Do you remember when I'd just turned 21 and I was living in Florence and you gifted me that beautiful leather-bound diary? That year I filled it with Venetian proverbs and notes about writers and poets like Lord Byron, who you introduced me to. And the day before I was to leave Italy and return to finish my degree in Australia, I decided to jump on a train alone and see Venice for the first time with my own eyes. I'm reading A Traveller in Italy by the great travel journalist H.V. Morton, published in 1964. He too writes about returning to Venice after 25 years and recalls his first time. There it was, the Venice one had seen so often in books and art galleries, the old palaces, the striped mooring poles, the black gondolas. Venice offering not the sharp stab of discovery but the gentler nudge of recognition. It is almost as though one were living a second time and visiting scenes familiar in a former life. That passage makes me wonder. I remember having only encountered Venice in paintings and descriptions in books, but now that era is over. I wonder about Morton's observation. To me, Venice is both a sharp stab of discovery and gentle recognition of a former life, because the lead up to most of its beauty happens in a narrow alleyway or shadowy canal, and la bellezza, the beauty, una piazza, un ponte, un palazzo, is revealed with an abruptness one is never quite prepared for. Even the arrival by train, you walk off the platform and suddenly Venice materializes in front of you. The water, the architecture, the activity. I'm here this time as a newlywed with my Florentine husband. Italians have a saying, dopo I confetti si vedono I difetti. After the confetti or the wedding, one sees the defects. But I didn't feel that way at all. Perhaps because we didn't marry young. I was trepidatious around the time of the engagement, and yet in these months since the wedding, he continues to make me fall deeper in love. The historic place we're staying in is filled with art and texture and detail. I could sit for hours watching how the light and water reflections play on different surfaces of this magical suite. Our table at dinner was where Hemingway used to sit because he wanted to be in a cozy nook away from the main diners. The first night we went to have dinner with a friend of Guido's and her Venetian husband. Inevitably, we discussed tourism, and while the locals can lament the masses who don't even bother to read about the history of this fairy tale land they're so keen to photograph, the Venetians also want the locals to be employed and concede that Venice is no longer the trading epicenter it once was, and required a new form of commerce to pay for the decaying beauty of one of the most decadent cities in the world. In the book, Morton notes a surprising fondness for the tourists. He writes, I was not displeased to find that the much abused tourists lend an air of gaiety and vitality to Venice. The crowds almost provide the illusion that this city is still the Adriatic queen and her inhabitants lords of the gold of all Christendom. It's an unusual opinion. Maybe he was right. Maybe Venice was always destined to have frivolity, chatter, movimento, multiculturalism, eyes darting, gazing, judging, trading. And in one era, this was enacted by merchants and poets as one of the most important ports connecting Europe to the Middle East. And then once it declined in economic power by the start of the 17th century, gradually the role of creating life and vibrancy and a meeting point of cultures began to be played by those coming for beauty rather than silk and spices. The Venice Film Festival, the first film festival in all the world, the Biennale, an art exhibition so renowned it has now branched into other categories like architecture. Morton goes on to write, I looked in vain for a turban, which was a feature of the Venetian crowd as recently as the 19th century, but I only saw a group of Japanese photographers and an Indian girl in a sari. In 1782, Beckford was an English novelist and art collector, was struck by the great number of Eastern people and heard Turkish and Arabic muttering in every corner. Morton goes on to cite Ruskin, a famous writer, philosopher, painter, and art critic. In 1851, Ruskin wrote, "You may walk from sunrise to sunset, to and fro, before the gateway of St. Mark's, and you will not see an eye lifted to it, nor a countenance brightened by it. Priest and layman, soldier and civilian, rich and poor pass it by alike regardlessly." Isn't this incredible? One assumes architecture or natural beauty or anything inspiring awe has always been this way and has some objective elemental effect on the viewer. But throughout the eras, what we value, what we gaze upon, what we pause to capture for our memories or our camera swells and recedes like the tides of the Adriatic Sea. The writer Ruskin felt painfully aware of this back in 1845 when he witnessed the owner of the magnificent Palazzo Cadoro selling off pieces of the facade and fervently attempted to sketch the intricate beauty before it disappeared forever. And again in 1849 when he feared the Palazzo Ducale would be destroyed by occupying Austrian troops. We walk for hours. We eat cicchetti standing in a bar with people 20 years younger and 20 years older than us. We even try ice skating for the first time in a little piazza away from the main streets, Venetian bambini gliding past us, shrieking and laughing as the sky turns crimson. And in that square, I find a pharmacy with a historic concoction I've been reading about. Morton wrote about the world's most ancient medicine, Theriaca. He wrote that it appeared in travel books and letters all throughout the 17th century, and no visitor would dream of leaving Venice without purchasing a supply. It was used as an antidote to poison, but apparently was taken for everything from a toothache to the plague in the Middle Ages in the Renaissance. Morton wrote back in the 60s that the elderly Venetians took it regularly as a cure-all potion. The reason it was of such high quality in Venice was because it was made with spices which were in rich abundance only in Venice. In the 17th century, it contained over 60 ingredients. It is said that they would boil the spices with honey in great cauldrons in front of the pharmacy, and that you can still see the dent of a cauldron on the pavement in front of some pharmacies from these times. To my delight, I find a modern-day form of this medicine in the little farmacia where we go ice skating, and I ask the pharmacist what he knows of it. They used to make it with the flesh of a viper snake, he tells me. Ormai nessuno la compra più. These days no one buys it anymore. I didn't buy a mask or Murano glass in Venice. I bought only this little bottle of spices which felt so special to me. It may not have snake meat or goat's blood as it once did, but in this blend of spices there is a story, a thread to our past, a human desire for health that has been with us since before Christ. We dine on rich northern Italian dishes and wake before sunrise to feel the peace of La Serenissima, which literally translates as the most serene. Breakfast is cozy and indulgent, with gondolas gliding in the background of our cornetti and café. We travel across the water to La Chiesa di San Giorgio Maggiore. Its grandeur is tempered by its position, just observing the spectacle of the Grand Canal and Piazza San Marco from afar. There's an intimacy that wouldn't be possible if it were in the central path of all. I remember the first day I saw Venice. I wore that long silk skirt you gifted me, and I still recall the feeling of the fabric gathered in my hands as I ventured over bridges, reverent and enchanted. Now it is winter, but the sunshine falls on everything but the most narrow alleyways and canals. There is more gazing and sighing to do, but we have only 2.5 days. And so, until next time, alla prossima.